Hi, everyone. Welcome to the second season of the Modern Golden Age podcast. My name is Joao, and today I have with me Tasshin. Tasshin, thank you so much for doing this. It's a pleasure to talk with you. How are you?
My pleasure, friend. I'm doing very well. Happy to be here.
Yeah. So I decided to start this podcast by stealing one of your questions. Actually, you have a podcast, the Rich Truth podcast, which, by the way, I love,
Mhm.
and I only recently discovered it actually, and I want to share with you like my journey to get into your work, but I'll do it later. I want to start with the question that you start your own podcast, which is basically tell us a little bit about who Tashin is and what do you do.
Okay. Yes. Well, I am a wandering pilgrim or monk or quasi-monk, whichever you'd prefer. And I live a pretty simple life, and I try to spend my time on various service projects, ideally projects that help people, but also are enjoyable for me and fun. And also I'm supported by generosity, so I have a Patreon, and that's how I make my living. And yeah, so I travel from place to place, staying with different people, and um, anywhere from like a night to 6 weeks or a couple months, and then yeah, spend my time on my service projects. And I spend quite a bit of time online on Twitter and with my podcasts and various other things. So very online person, and yeah, that's sort of who I am.
Yeah. So like one of the things that I really enjoyed when getting to know you was like this whole traveling around lifestyle. And one of my questions is like, how does that work? Like, do you choose the place where you're going and then you try to find friends there? Do you just do friends offer you and you just accept the offers? Like, how does that work, if I may ask?
Of course. Yes. Well, at the beginning, I just asked around for friends and said, "Oh, I'm planning on doing this, and would you be willing to put me up?" And now people sort of know that this is how I live, and so offers come to me, and I keep a list of different places that I can stay, and uh, sort of just decide as much as possible from visit to visit where I'm going next. But in some cases, practically, especially since I have my service projects, I sort of need to know, like, oh, for example, I'm going to Vermont next, and it's because I'm going to be running something there in September. And so it's like I knew I was going to be there for that. So in some cases, it's sort of deciding in advance. But yeah, I have plenty of places to stay all over the world, and people often offer more. And yeah, it's just a matter of deciding where and when I want to go. Yeah.
Yeah, that's like one of the things that I really value. Like, so I after the first season, I realized that one of the common values that was presented by the different guests around the modern golden age is courage, and to me that takes a lot of courage, like the kind of lifestyle you're having. So, did you when you decided to do it? Was it something like you decided like that consciously? Did you have like some kind of fear to do that? So I'll guide us through that process of deciding to live like a quasi-monk style
hmm hmm
lifestyle actually.
Yes. Well, I think it sort of starts in 2015, which was the year that I first trained in the monastery. And one of the things that I did the year was I went on a walking pilgrimage. And this was something that my teacher had told me about, Sorry for All, and that, he was also inspired by many people, but in particular, Peace Pilgrim, who's become quite an inspiration for me as well, since I've learned about her. And um, the way that I was taught walking pilgrimage is less like, oh, you're going to a specific holy site and you're going to go there on a specific route, which is an established, well-known way of practicing pilgrimage. But this is a different way where you don't have a destination in mind. You just start walking, and
Mm,
you get to a fork in the road, and you sort of have to decide, well, if I don't have somewhere that I'm trying to get, how do I decide whether to go left or right? And there's this activity that you could call trusting or surrendering or having faith
mm,
or courage, where that you can actually practice. And it's like, well, I think I should go left.
yeah,
For some reason that's not logical or reasoned, you're like, I think I should go left, so you go left. And you can bring that same quality into each of your decisions. And
decisions.
yes, And so I did 2 walking pilgrimages at different times, one in Vermont and one in California. And then let's see, when I left the monastery last year, initially I was planning on getting a job and an apartment and something like that. And then I realized that really wasn't going to work for me. Basically, I got this job that was on paper perfect for me. It was with people that I loved, doing something that I cared about, using all of my skills. It was a nonprofit, and I still was just like, oh, I don't like having a job.
Yeah.
I felt very cramped by it. And meanwhile, I was working on my own projects, and those just felt so much more enlivening and fun and I think beneficial. And so I was like, how can I make that work where I'm just working on my projects? And there were sort of these 2 sides of one, starting my Patreon so that people could support me, and then also, asking people to stay with them and go from place to place. And I think those were the biggest fears in the beginning, were that I wouldn't have enough money or I wouldn't have a place to stay. And for the first few months, I really worried about that quite a bit. And then at a certain point, essentially I realized that from the meditation perspective, worrying about those things was just worry, from like the hindrances from a Buddhist perspective, one of the 5 hindrances. I have a blog post about that if people are curious and learning more, but worry is just a hindrance. It's just a phenomenon in the mind that's not particularly helpful, right? Me worrying about it wasn't getting me money or getting me a place to stay. And I did have money and I did have a place to stay, so it just didn't seem useful. And I said, okay, basically, I vow to not worry about either money or a place to stay anymore. And anytime that those worries come up, which they still do periodically, I know how to work with them as a meditation practice, basically, like how to resolve them. And so I just don't worry about it anymore. Or if the worries arise, then I let go of them. And so far, I've had enough money to live and I've had places to stay. And it seems to be a very wholesome, good way of life. So
yeah, awesome. So you touched on a specific point, which is meditation, and I want to go back until before Tasshin was like the monk you are. So I think I read or listened to somewhere that you started meditating on college when you were 19 years old. That was your first practice on meditation, right? Why did you decide to start, and how did that go?
Well, in high school, I had a period of being a very fervent atheist, like for some reason, I wasn't even raised particularly theistic, but I was like, oh, God is false, religions are bad, people are trying to lie to me, manipulate me. For some reason, that was how I saw the world at the time. Maybe just like when you go through a rebellious stage, that was the ideology that came to me at the time. And in my school, I went to St. John's College, which is a liberal arts school where everyone has to do the same thing, including reading the great books. They're behind me over there, the books that I read in school. And in the sophomore year, you have to read, the Torah and the New Testament and various works of theology. And it's despite the name, it's not a religious school, but it's part of the Western civilization. And I knew in advance that reading those books was basically going to be triggering for me, because I was like, oh, I hate religion so much. I hate the idea of God. And that I needed to develop some kind of essentially maturity to be able to read those books charitably. And I wanted to read them charitably, but I knew that I wasn't able to do it so at that time. And so I hit on basically a plan of exposure therapy where I read the summer before that, I read the great religious texts from the East, or some of them. So I read the Dhammapada, and I read the Bhagavad Gita, and the Tao Te Ching, and then I read various other sort of like ancillary like Western pop Buddhism books and that sort of thing. And The Razor's Edge, which I love, from Somerset Maugham. And all of those books sort of clued me in that religions were pointing to the same thing, something that was real, some kind of experience that's transcendent, hard to put into words, but the point isn't to manipulate you or hurt you. It's to help you access this sort of supra-rational, beautiful, transcendent experience of understanding who you are and what the universe is. And they might use different metaphors or symbols or have different sort of ideologies around it, but it seemed like the core was the
The main
same.
goal. Yeah.
Yes. So that was very persuasive to me. And yet I didn't want to adopt a religion because I was still sort of scared of it or afraid of it. And meditation seemed like something that I could do on my own without believing in anything or worshiping anyone or paying money or needing to understand the world in a particular way. I could just follow my breath, for example. And that's sort of how I started. Yeah.
Yeah. Awesome. And then that ended up developing into a more serious practice, because I listened to a podcast where you said that you were putting in every day, like you were basically taking out what you were putting in. Basically, you were meditating like 30 minutes every day, and you were feeling more focused and more aware in your day to day. But you wanted a little bit more, right? And so tell us a little bit about that. Like, what followed your daily practice of meditation? Like, how did you get into the next level? Let's call it that.
Well, I started meditating, it would have been the fall of my sophomore year of college, or early winter, December, something like that. And, that was about 6 months of meditation that I did on my own, half an hour a day. And then that summer, I did my first retreat. And I remember very distinctly coming back from that retreat and just being like, I want to do this for the rest of my life. This is the most important thing. And I want to do as much of this as I can. And this is just so important. And,
how long was the retreat? Sorry to interrupt.
It was a 10-day retreat, one of those Goenka retreats, a Vipassana retreat.
Yeah.
And then the question became how to actually do that. And I considered dropping out of school for a little while, just like maybe that's more important, and eventually decided not to. But I decided to finish my education, and then it was sort of like, the metaphor I like to use is like I was jogging half an hour a day. I was like just amateur jogger, and I was like, no, I want to like train. And my meditation was just so poor at the time. It was just like what would happen was I would follow my breath and get very frustrated with myself that I couldn't do it. I was like, what is happening? This is hard. And so I knew I needed help. I knew I needed a teacher and a community. And from that perspective, it sort of was obvious, a monastery could be a thing where I could practice as much as I'd like to. And then the question became which monastery to train at, because I looked at various monasteries in the United States and in Asia, and found a lot of places that I really respected and thought was doing great stuff. But it was clear to me I'm not going to be able to train there, because I was an American millennial, from the suburbs. Like, that's a very different cultural context than being, say, for example, a Thai person. I trained at a Thai monastery briefly for like a retreat, and I was like, wow, what they're doing is beautiful and inspiring, and they're definitely doing good training, and I am not going to fit here. Like, I am not a Thai person. And
can you just explain like some of, like, when you say they were doing some training and you weren't a Thai person, like what were the specific things that they were doing that you think you weren't so inclined to do?
Yeah.
Because I'm totally an amateur, right? So I have no idea what the differences are between the different monasteries and all that. So if you could please give me some context, I would appreciate it.
Of course. I think Thai Buddhism is, in my mind, very similar to, say, like Roman Catholicism, where it's obviously a very different culture, but it's ubiquitous in Thailand, in certain parts of Southeast Asia. Thailand was the place that I was most familiar with, but certainly this would apply in other countries as well. With differences for the local culture, but almost everyone is Buddhist. Almost everyone trains in the monastery at some point in their life, and there's a lot of like cultural infrastructure around supporting the monasteries. Most people donate to monks. People go to the monasteries periodically. There's a lot of religious iconography and symbolism and ritual, and it's incredibly beautiful. I had no issue with it, but all of that cultural infrastructure was built for the Thai culture, and it's like I could see that it was good, but I'm not a Thai person, so
got it.
I think that when you take a religious tradition from one sociocultural setting and transpose it into another, say the Western world, then it seems to me like that transposition is going to work for some minority of the population, 5, 10,
Yeah.
15%. And it was obvious to me, like, I am not a Thai person, I'm not a Japanese person, I'm not
So,
Korean, I'm not
yeah.
Vietnamese. I love all these cultures and appreciate them, but I need an American
Yeah.
Western thing.
Approach. Yeah. That
Yeah,
makes total sense.
yeah,
And so you ended up going to a monastery, and like one of the things that I'm really curious about are like, what are some of like, let's say like 3, 4, 5 lessons or situations or stories that happened while you were there that really had a profound impact in you and in your own path?
yes. I think a monastery is a lot like what I imagine, say, joining the military might be like. I've never been in the military, but people who've been to a monastery have this sort of shared experience of like, oh yeah, that's what it's like. And it's not actually that complex or
Mm,
special, but it's rare that people have that experience. And so if you know, you know, and if you don't, you don't. But I'll try my best to explain. I think for starters, it's just highly regimented. There's a schedule. It depends on the schedule and what's done at different places, but typically everything is scheduled to a time and a place, and you are supposed to be there, and you're in trouble if you're not there. And often it's like very early or very late at night, and there's a lot of silent meditation. Usually you're working with a teacher. I think that sort of schedule was very helpful for me. I mean, I was in my early 20s when I started training, and just gave me a lot of discipline and strength of just adhering to a form like that. And I think one of the there's a lot of things around that of, like, for example, having to make your bed every day, or you have to cook. I suddenly had to cook for like 20 or 30 people several times a week, where previously I'd only cooked for myself or a few other people. It's like, now I have to cook for 30 people. Or having to be responsible for various chores or various duties in the monastery, like increasing your capacity for responsibility. And when I was 22, 23 or whatever, the amount of responsibility that I could successfully hold was much lower than now at 31. I made a mess of things, and like wasn't capable of nearly as much. And importantly, I think that structure really helped me over time to build that capacity of responsibility and how much I could hold, such that it's like I was a level 3 person in a video game, and now I'm, it doesn't matter what level, but a higher level that's not
mm,
infinitely capable but more
mm,
capable. And it's very much like progressive, where you
mm-hmm,
successively get more and more responsibility the more you can handle.
mm-hmm,
So that was helpful to me. I think associated with that, a lot of times the bottleneck was less specific skills that I needed to gain, which I did need to gain, but often it was more like about my own internal capacity for noticing and resolving my own emotions or psychological
mm,
difficulties, and also like communicating with other people that might be going through something similar. And
mm,
to the extent that I couldn't do that, I would suffer or cause suffering for others. And
mm,
so it doesn't make sense to have a tremendous amount of responsibility if you're just going to either explode internally or really hurt someone externally.
yeah.
um, so I had to, I mean, really, frankly, I look back and how to put this, how to put this. I need to say this kindly to myself, but I mean, it hurts to remember, but there was a lot of suffering. There's just so much suffering, and a lot of it self-induced, um,
Mm,
and learning how to not suffer in that way. And not like I'm free from suffering now, but the kinds of suffering that I cause myself are less frequent or less intense. And learning to work with that, and
mm-hmm,
just hold my own experience compassionately. Um, that Another one that comes to mind much later on, it was very transformative experience, was at a certain point, I was in charge of fundraising for the monastery and for the whole nonprofit organization. And I have a post about fundraising that I wrote that's like basically everything that I learned from that time.
Mm-hmm.
And I had several fundraising mentors that really helped me learn how to do that. And there were, again, a lot of practical skills that I had to learn, that I did learn. But most importantly, at the core, I had to work with directly a sense of shame around receiving or asking for money. Yes. And just really confront that. That was just, for some reason, that was so embodied. And I had to realize, and I don't know how I could like transfer this transition, but it was something like realizing that what I'm asking for money is a good thing that should exist in the world. And to the extent that I'm connected to that I really believe this is a good thing, then it makes sense to ask for money. Like you should ask for money. It's a good thing to do so. And gaining a sense of knowing that certainty that it was a good thing, confidence in being able to ask it. And that was that in a large ways, that's part of what's made my current life possible, because I'm not ashamed to say, oh, I have a Patreon. You can support me if you want to, or I have specific service projects that I do that I need to raise money for, where like I made an animated music video last year that I raised $6,500 for, which was the most that I've raised for a personal project. I've raised more for nonprofits, but for a personal project, I was like, no, this is a good thing. It should exist. This video is great. It's going to be great. And so I don't have shame asking for money if it's a good project anymore. Yeah.
And it's a great video. And it's so funny that you mentioned that, because here's how I got hold of you on the internet. So a bunch of months ago, someone posted like the Google document where you have the draft for your ebook, which is called The Path of Love. And I remember looking at it, and I just like scrolled through a bunch of chapters and quickly read some of it. And I thought, this is such a great idea. I really want to read that. And I'm going to be honest, it just ended up like on this list of thousands of things that I want to read in right. And so I didn't associate that with you. So it was a book that I've read, and that I wanted to read, and that's it. Then on Twitter there was this dude called Tasshin, which had this amazing avatar. I really enjoyed it. This drawing that you actually have here in Zoom as well. And so, which by the way was made by Sylvia, I think, right? Was Sylvia that done it? Yeah. Shout out to Sylvia. And so I started to see you there, but then I don't know who else shared that post on fundraising. And I clicked on that post, and that was transformative, because it was the perfect moment, because where I'm working right now, we work at a nonprofit. I'm working on a nonprofit. And we were in the moment of the year where we had to do some fundraising. And even though it's not my main job in the organization, I'm always trying to help. And I saw that, and it's such a beautiful, enlightened piece where you understand that, first of all, you need to understand your own relationship with money and with your own projects. And then, as you say, like asking for money is something that really makes sense. So I read it. It had a deep impact on me. I sent it to the people that were responsible for fundraising. And only then I realized that you were actually following me on Twitter. I was like, oh my God, that's so awesome. And then after, I think it was actually after our first conversation, or actually what was to be our first conversation, that was only then that I connected the book that I had on that with you as well. And so I still haven't read the book. I'm sorry. I plan to. But like that's how I got into your work, and it was phenomenal to understand that you had like these three great pillars, let's call it like that, in your own life, which is love, curiosity, and empowerment. And I was wondering if you could talk us a little bit more about each one of them. Like, what do they mean to you, and when you say that you're trying to bring that into the world, like specifically what you want to do, or how do you want to do it, and talk us a little bit more about your service projects that are somehow related with these three pillars.
Yes, yes. Finding these three areas or pillars of my work has been the a major theme of the time since I've left the monastery about a year and a half ago. It's almost been an experience of unfolding and noticing what's already there. So I think these threads have been there for quite a while, but formally acknowledging them and sort of weaving them into my projects has been extremely helpful for me personally. Just be like, this is what I'm doing. It's because if you work a traditional job at a nonprofit or a company or something, you get a job description, right? It's like, okay, we would like you to be like, what's your official job title at your work?
I'm a pedagogical coordinator.
Okay, pedagogical coordinator, perfect, right? And presumably at some point you saw something that's like a job description for what that is, and it has a title, and it's like these are your responsibilities and the skills you need, and you're like, okay, I know what I'm doing. I haven't had the luxury of that in the last year and a half. It's like, okay, I'm going to work on service projects. What am I? How do I frame it? How do I understand it myself? How do I describe it to other people? And so this really feels like almost like finding my job description a year in.
Yeah.
It's like, that's what I'm doing. I've already been doing it, but okay, now I know these three things. So let's see. So they sort of really unfolded for me in noticing that they were there in that order. So I'll take them in order. So love, when I was at the monastery, I did various forms of teaching, meditation and Buddhism and spiritual practice. And something I noticed during the time that I was there was the form of meditation that I most enjoyed teaching and people seemed to benefit from the most was loving kindness, metta meditation. And I just felt there are many forms of meditation that I've practiced that I've found helpful and I've taught them, but that one, of course, it's been extremely helpful for me personally, but I really enjoyed teaching it and people really seem to benefit when I teach it. I would leave it happy and other people would leave it happy. And, people would be like, referencing times that I taught it, and it just clearly really had an impact on people. And in retrospect, I think some of that is that I never really liked the way that I was taught metta myself, and I thought that I could do it better, and that I think I do teach it better than it's taught in some ways. And so typically, not in all cases or something, but like that was an important thing to me of, hey, this is a skill that's useful and I think I can do this well. So that's been a big part of it. Over time, it's sort of spread from metta in particular to all of the Brahma Viharas, which are, 4 Buddhist qualities that are sort of mutually supportive and related, but distinct. And then also recently, I've just been finding it useful to call it the English word love, because I think it encompasses other positive qualities as well, like, gratitude or forgiveness or, just acts of kindness or things like this. And so I still speak about the Brahma Viharas in particular when relevant, but increasingly find it's about teaching and spreading love, inspiring people to practice love. That's the first sort of pillar.
Can I just pause you to ask you some questions around love? So I think I have like 2 different questions. So the first one is like for someone who's listening to you and understanding that there's a specific kind of meditation, and I don't want to go into all the different types of meditation, because you did a really good podcast on that. I don't remember with whom, but I'll post the link on the description where you talk about all these different kinds of meditation. But for someone who's listening to you and just realize, there's a type of meditation around love and kindness, and I really want to do it. And let's say that someone is me, because I really wanted to do it. So how did you, like, what do you recommend for someone to start working on that specific practice?
Well, importantly, the kind of meditation that it is one you might call cultivation, where you're intentionally creating certain qualities in your experience, which is in contrast to, say, observing your experience, say, following the breath, which was my first meditation technique, right? There, you don't try to change the breath, you just notice it. And that can be jarring for some people to be like, oh, I'm creating something, I'm intentionally creating something. That's different. And it's like the difference between, say, strength and cardio or something, of like, those are just different kinds of exercise. They're both exercise, but they're different. So what you're doing is intentionally creating loving thoughts or feelings of any kind. And there's basically infinite ways to do that. And it's a matter of finding ways of creating loving thoughts and feelings that really work for you, that you enjoy doing, ideally that create those feelings in your body where you can actually feel them, which takes time to learn how to do. But there's sort of a period of trial and error where you're like, oh, how do I create these thoughts and feelings? And what does resonate for me? And that's part of why I like to teach lots and lots of different ways of doing it, because what works for me might be different than what works for you. What works for you might be different than your friend. And so by trying on these different ways, you can kind of work out over time, oh, this is the way I like to do it, and that works for me, and I'm going to do more of that, right?
Perfect. Yeah. And like, I saw, because I really wanted to get into it. I've seen people like talk about meta for a while, but I didn't understand what it was. And I noticed that you have like some YouTube videos on it, right? And you also do like this live meditation around it. Can you talk a little bit about that as well? Like, do you recommend like following the videos as a way to actually start doing it, or do you recommend to first do the live sessions on Discord, I think, and then, or on Zoom? I'm not sure.
On Zoom,
and on Zoom, yeah, sorry, and then do the videos.
Oh, well, I think I try to have a lot of different ways of sharing it available, because different people prefer different things. So the live sessions, for example, are recorded so that people can listen to them at any time. So I always like to joke that if no one shows up to that event, which has never happened, not once, there's always at least one person so far, but if no one shows up, I'll still record it and someone will listen to it later, you know. But I don't know if you like recordings, those are available. If you like a live session, you can actually talk to me. Those are every Saturday. They're totally free. I have my book, if you like that. I have a blog post that's shorter if you don't want to read a whole book. It's the same. Basically, the blog is being turned into the book, where the book is a longer version of the thing. I think, you know, I have those videos that's a series of 10-minute short videos. Those are available as well. Just kind of pick the one that seems like functional for you and do that one.
Perfect. We'll add like all those links in the description or in the blog post about your episode, and people will follow. Yeah, go ahead.
One thing I'd just add about that real quick is, like, I really think that the way I think about this is different people are going to resonate with different teachers. And so I think the kind of people that will resonate with the way I approach it is maybe different than, you know, who would resonate with a different teacher. And so if you're interested in these practices, but you don't happen to resonate with the way I talk about it, like there's lots and lots of other people that teach it, and that, you know, you don't have to do my stuff. So I like Robert Bea, and, you know, there's a bunch of other teachers out there, and would really recommend exploring if you don't happen to like the way I do it in particular.
Okay, perfect. So that's love. Let's go to the second pillar, curiosity.
Yes. Well,
second area. Sorry, pillar is my word. Yours is area. Sorry.
No. I've used the word pillar, but it doesn't matter. But yeah, I think this was sort of the second one that came online for me of noticing this. Oh yeah, that's what I'm doing. Because at first it was a question of like, okay, well, I teach metta and I'm doing that, but how does this other stuff fit in? How does the blog fit in? How does my podcast fit in? How do my Twitter threads fit in? How does me reading a book at 3 a.m. on a Saturday fit in? You know, like, what's going on here? And you know, I've had my blog in its current form since arguably 2019, 2018. It was on Medium, and then I moved it to my domain. I've had blogs before that, so you know, I've been writing for years in different forms, and that's always been a part of things. And then I started my podcast early last year, so a little less than a couple of years that's been around. And you know, kind of there was an open question for me of how does this fit in? And I think yeah, eventually I realized, oh, I'm just following my curiosity. I'm curious about a lot of different things. I have a lot of questions about the world, about other people. The more I live, the more questions I have. And I've had the experience of really having a question and then satisfactorily answering it, right? Like, oh, now I know the answer to this question. And then I become curious about other stuff. But you can actually answer the questions that you have to some extent to your satisfaction. And that's deeply fulfilling process, and asking questions, being curious, finding answers, repeating, iterating that. And even if you do answer a question, new questions open up. And the blog and the podcast and other things I do are ways of following that curiosity and seeing where it leads me.
Yeah, perfect. And the third one, empowerment.
Yes, this has really just come online this year of it's consciously noticing that this is what I'm doing. I think at its basis, there's a specific teaching that my teacher Soryu shared of a vow, which comes from Buddhism in different forms, but also, you find echoes of the same kinds of ideas elsewhere. It's not exclusively limited to Buddhism, but, a more common way that you might talk about it is as a life purpose, right? I don't particularly like that framing myself. I like vow or gift is a word that I've been liking for it recently. But this idea that your life has some larger intent that you can fulfill, and how to find that and how to live it. And I found that frame very helpful for me personally. One way of putting these three things, love, curiosity, and empowerment, is like that's my current way of conceptually understanding what my life is about, right? And finding that has been very meaningful and fulfilling for me, and clarified things and helped me to be of service to other people. And so I want to help other people do that. And to some extent, every time I'm interacting with someone, I'm assuming, oh, this person also has a vow. This person has some purpose. They have some goal or quest or journey that they're on. And is it possible for me to know what that is and to help them, right? I might not know what everyone's is. I might not be able to help everyone. But if I do know what someone's is, if I have a sense of it and I can help them, then I want to help them. That desire arises naturally. And so, for quite some time, subconsciously, I've been acting on that desire to notice and help people in their vow. I think looking back on different projects that I've had, they were like sort of doing that. Like for example, one project that I did was the digital productivity coach that I worked on with my friend James Stuber. And basically, people were asking us for help with learning the productivity skills that we learned. And it was like, well, a lot of people are asking us, and we can't have 10 hours of conversations with 100 people. So we built this tool to help people do it. And it's like, that's empowering people. That's helping them to level up their capacity to act in the world and act on the things that they really care about. That's a form of empowerment, right? So it's still pretty early days of consciously doing this. There's a program I'm running next month with James, actually, and also Mary, and my friend Mary, and it's called Give Your Gift. And it's sort of like taking a small cohort of people and trying to intentionally help them live their vow or give their gift. And part of that will be about discerning what their gifts are, and then also giving them specific assignments that will help them to move forward with giving their gift.
Awesome. Yeah. So yeah, that's a beautiful answer. Can I ask you something, which is like, why do you call it vow? Because gift, I understand, purpose too, but why vow? I really like I don't know why, but there was something that resonated deeply with me when you said it, but I'm not sure what it was. Like, why do you call it that?
Yes. I'm glad that you're attuned to that. I think I've made some lists of all of the different words that you could use for this concept. And I think some of them will really resonate for some people, and others will even be aversive for some people. And I think some people hear this word and it's like, no, I don't want to vow. Like promise, that feels heavy, like vow, oath, like it feels burdensome or heavy. But for me, definitely this sense of inspiration. First off, this is just how I first learned of it. This is the word that my teacher used. He, I believe, was influenced by one of his teachers, Bodhidhamma Bhanteji, who practiced deeply in Rinzai Zen, but also importantly in a form of Buddhism that's probably not that well known in the West, but it's called Ambedkar Buddhism. He practices and teaches in India, and basically Ambedkar was a contemporary of Gandhi who was aiming to, Gandhi was sort of aiming to reform the caste system, but Ambedkar wanted to end the caste system, and he converted from Hinduism to or I think he might have been, I'd have to double check that, but I guess he converted to Buddhism and specifically created this form of Buddhism that was a socially active form of Buddhism aimed at ending the caste system in India. And my teacher trained there for a while. And this is something that apparently, I'm hearing this like secondhand, but that Bodhidharma Bhantiji would say is people, that's what people are. They are a vow. That's just what they are. And apparently I asked Soryu about this recently, and it comes from a concept in Mahayana Buddhism called, I believe the word is pranidhana or seigan in Japanese. And I am hoping to talk to him more about this some point, but this is apparently like an old idea in Mahayana Buddhism that he translates in English as the word vow. And the basic idea there, I think, the way that he talks about it that really deeply inspired me is less that, for example, with a life purpose or, there's a sense of this is preordained, say from God or the universe or something, where it's like there is a specific purpose that you are here to do, and you either do it or you don't. And the way that he talks about it, it's where your desires meet the world's needs, basically. And there's a conversation between you and the world, and it's at that point that the vow is. And for me, that's a much more, the words that I would use to describe that are emergent and iterative rather than predestined or something like that.
Enclosed.
So for example, no one ever told me, Tasshin, you're going to make music videos, right? Like that was, if you told me that 2 years ago, I would have thought you were nuts. Like, what are you talking about? No, you're crazy. And yet at a certain point in dialogue with the world and my own desires, it was like, oh, I should make a music video. Okay, cool. And now I'll make two, and maybe I'll make some more in the future, I hope. That's a perfect example of this sort of thing where it's not something you could have predicted or preordained, but it's in dialogue with your life and the world that it sort of emerges.
Yeah, that was so beautiful. I love it. It really, because I had something in your answer just helped me clarify that iterative process. And also like, because purpose is almost something like it's only about you usually, right? It's your purpose. But a vow, it involves that you have it with someone, right? With the world. And so it does really make sense. So thank you for that answer. So as you know, the podcast is called the Modern Golden Age Podcast, and I deeply believe that everyone that I've been talking with in the first season, and I'm about to talk with in the second season, is doing some kind of work that I believe it will lead humanity, or it leads humanity closer to what modern golden age is. And so I believe, of course, that you're also one of those individuals. And I wanted to ask you, like, when you think about this concept of a modern golden age, like, what do you think about, like, what is to you a modern golden age? And just to give you some context, like, Visakan from Twitter, and he has this meme about the dominoes meme, right, that ends with golden age of humanity. That was the meme that made me create the podcast and do this whole change pursuing it. And so with that in mind, like, what's your own definition of a modern golden age?
Yeah. The first thing that comes to mind for me is an experience that I had last year, pretty shortly after I left the monastery. Of basically, I took MDMA, and it was the second time in my life that I'd taken MDMA, and I took it in high school once, very small dose, and so this was arguably, like, effectively the first time I'd taken it, and I had this experience of a lot of wisdom coming to me, basically. And I had to write it all down. And a lot of my favorite tweets are actually things that came to me on that trip. And one of the insights that came to me at that time, and this is sort of framed in my own way of seeing things, and in particular, kind of a Buddhist lens on things that, may or may not resonate for someone listening to this, but was extremely resonant for me personally, was a sense of, we are at a moment of intense change where things are changing dramatically, rapidly, in complex, hard to predict ways. And I had this intense sense of, either we are going to enter, you can take this literally or metaphorically. It works either way. If you're not sure, take it metaphorically. I think probably that's better. But metaphorically, we could enter a hell realm where things are really, 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 really bad. All of the worst scenarios of climate crisis or nuclear weapons or AI devastating the world or whatever it is, right? Or alternatively, we could enter a heavenly realm where things are really, 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 really good. And the sense I had was it's going to be one or the other. There's not going to be an in between. It's like either going to be really bad or it's going to be really good. And from that perspective, if it's one or the other, then the thing that makes sense to me to do with that insight was put all of my efforts, all of my energy, all of my time, all of my skills into making a heavenly realm rather than a hell realm. And so who knows what will happen, or even if that's true, but that's one way that I conceive of my time and efforts, is just trying to make things better, good rather than worse, right? And yeah, so then the question is, what do I imagine? And how to put this? Yeah, I'm just going to lean into answering this question the way I see it, which is over the last year, I've also gotten quite interested in Magik with a K, and not something I ever expected, but it's sort of a thing that I've become interested in. And I actually recently published a piece called The Dark that's about my experience with time magic. And a lot of that piece is specifically about relating to the past, things that have happened to me in the past, even in very difficult experiences that I've had. And I've also, and I haven't written as much about this publicly, but done some work with the future and possible futures that could arise. And what would it actually look like for us to enter a heavenly realm? And I think over the winter, I did quite a bit of work on this and sort of imagined a lot of different things. And I wrote, I don't know, maybe 10 or 12 private pages about what this would look like. And maybe I'll publish some of that at some point. I'm not sure. It's very personal. But one of the things that really, how to put this, really felt like a guiding light of possibility for me was somewhat tricky to describe, but something like, this is a very clear intuitive sense, but I was looking at my days and how I spend my days. And there's a lot of different things that I do with my days, as we're talking about, right? There's a lot of different things that I do. I might write, I might dance, I might have a Zoom call, I might record a podcast, I might draw, I might go for a walk, I might do Tai Chi. There's a lot of different things that I do. And I fill my days with as many good things as I can. I just try to do all the good things every day. And there's sort of a finite capacity of how much good things I can do in a day. And so the sensibility I had for the future was, what if it becomes radically possible to amplify how much good things you can do in a given day, and with who and how many simultaneously? So for example, what if while having this podcast, I could also be writing an essay and drawing something and doing Tai Chi and be in some deep concentration state all at once, right? Like, wouldn't that be incredible if I could do all of those things at once, and with no sacrificing quality, some of them being social with someone else, some of them being highly
private,
individual. Yeah. And like, just almost like parallel activities, and a sense that might become possible. I don't know that that's true. Epistemic status is, I dreamed it, sort of a waking dream, hope, aspiration. But that would be nice. I would personally like that. I could imagine other people not liking that, but I would like it. And involved in that was not only a sense that the individual could do things in parallel, but also, how to put it, the sense of self would change and become extremely networked. I think we're already seeing this with Twitter. You're like, oh, he's already following me, right? Right. Like, Twitter is a very highly networked, complex thing where, there's, I think, like group consciousness basically happening. And so what if you take that and dial that up, and, various cognitive, emotional, interpersonal capacities can be distributed through people in a more increasingly meaningful way.
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense. And also, one of the things that I do believe it connects as well is this idea that you talked about, group consciousness. And what I mean by that is that there's no way we can build like a modern golden age based on an individual pursuit. It has to be something that's the collective building and dreaming, right? And that's why, like, one of the things that I love and I want to do is, I don't know when, I'm working on it right now. I don't know when I'll be able to manifest it into the real world. And when I say manifest, I'm not talking about just imagine, like, being able to build it, which is basically something that I call Metis, which will be like this hub here in Portugal where people can come from all over the world to work on this concept called modern golden age. Like any project that's somehow related to that, people can come from all these places and build something there and connect with people there. Because I believe that when you're able to bring those interconnections that happen so easily on Twitter to real life, suddenly things become like, I personally believe that the bar raises. Suddenly you're able to dream bigger and to create bigger and think bigger. And so that's one of the things that I really want to do. You mentioned magic with a K. Can you explain what you mean by that?
Yes. Of course, that word is associated with a lot of different things, and in particular, probably like Western magic and occultism and so on. And those are things that I've read about and have sort of inspired me to the extent that I've been exposed to them.
Yeah.
However, what I really mean now in my own use of the word is basically causality. And in particular, I think central to it is the belief that thoughts and feelings and the way that you see the world can have causal impacts. So in the sort of materialist worldview that's sort of around, the only thing that matters, say, is like bodily actions or interactions and physical things. But if you think that your thoughts and feelings have causal impacts on the world, then that leads to a different way of seeing things or a different way of behaving. And so if you take seriously, as I do, that thoughts and feelings have impacts, then that's what I mean by magic.
Perfect. Magic. Yeah, perfect. We're very aligned. And I believe that's a superpower that's available to almost anyone. It's just this small change on the way you see the world, but it's really hard to get people to do that small change. I'm not sure why. Maybe people are afraid that with that comes a lot of responsibility, right?
Yes.
The thing that, well, maybe if suddenly my thoughts and feelings have all this impact in the world, maybe I don't want that, because maybe I'll have thoughts and feelings that I don't want to affect, right?
Yes.
And that will be like a good indicator that maybe one should work on their own. Like, we're totally aligned with that. So I'll just have some more questions. And one of them is like, when I decided to create this podcast, first of all, I believe that I had to start a podcast with this very clear vision of what a modern golden age would look like. Now, actually not now, but when I started, before actually starting the podcast, I realized that was going to be impossible, because who am I to say what a modern golden age looks like? I'm just an individual. So it made sense to co-create that. And after talking with a bunch of people, I'm starting to craft this more clear vision, and I'm writing about it. But even so, one of the things that I still want to find, it's the common patterns, not only among the definition, but also about values and practices and goals that one should have while living this modern golden age. So my question to you would be, what are some of the practices that you believe one must have, or we as humanity must have, in order to let this modern golden age emerge?
I think that a new conception of, relation to, even mythology of self and humanity and life is going to be increasingly important. I think that one thing that I talked to my teacher Soryu at one point about was like something like we need to make two jumps from identifying as nations to a global planet, and then from there also identifying just as humans to life. And so I think that developing right relationship with not only the other humans on the planet, but also other animals and species and plants and the earth itself, and in some ways returning to a very enlivened sense of other beings on this planet and the Earth is very important. I think that
Mm.
is a critical part of healing the wounds that are present on this planet at this time, that we're as humans sort of inflicting on each other and the planet. I think we'll have to reckon with those things and reconcile them. And if you see other humans and other species and the planet itself as connected to you, related to you, as your family, as worthy of love, then that's a very different view than oh, those people are from a different country, or that's a different species that's inferior to me, or oh, the Earth is just dead matter, that doesn't have any importance. That's a very different way of seeing things. And if you see things that way, then you tend to act in certain ways. And
Yeah.
those ways, when scaled, cause things like global warming and other difficult problems, which are still real, right? We actually have to reconcile we have to address, notice, resolve the problems that we're causing in order to have this golden age, right? To avert this sort of hell realm, right?
Yeah.
So that's one thing, like really holding other life and other animals and plants and other humans and the Earth itself in a new way. Related to that, something I really see more and more with this work on love that I do is we want more love in the world. We want to be more loving ourselves, to be more loving towards other people, to have more love in the world. But the reason to do that is not that there is a shortage of love or a lack of love, or that there's a problem or we're not sufficiently loving. It's that love is infinite and boundless, and there's always more love to feel and express and act on. And so given that you would always want to embody, manifest, demonstrate, express more and more love, not because there's a shortage, but because there's more available. So I think connecting those two things, can we live in a way that really has reverence for, honors, respects not only other humans globally around the planet, but also all life on this planet?
Yeah. Yeah, that's beautiful. I really enjoyed that jump from, like, the first one is pretty easy to understand, like countries to global planet, but the jump from human individuals to life, can you clarify what you mean by that?
I think when you do metta practice, one of the things that you cultivate is seeing that if someone is alive, they are worthy of love and respect and care and kindness. And that's something that you can practice noticing, and you can practice expressing and acting on. And, a simple example would be the love that a mother feels for her child, right? A baby hasn't done anything yet, is not skilled in anything, can't take care of itself, and yet is still worthy of love, right? It's just worthy of this unconditional love simply because it's alive, right? And can you notice that same quality in everyone that you meet, right? Even if you enjoy their particular, like I'm enjoying this conversation, I like you, but even if I didn't like you, right, could I still see that you were worthy of love, right? That you're worthy of respect and care, removed from particular circumstances or conditions, right? Then if you see that quality, that is true regardless of what species you are too. So, the way that most humans hold this sort of thing is, and this breaks my heart to feel into, really, is on the planet at this time, there's a lot of concern for basically social justice and specific ways of seeing the world where people are being harmed for the identity that they have or the way that they are. And I feel for those things. I think that there are real problems that are being identified there. And at the same time, I think there's a similar kind of problem that's, to me, even greater, that we're doing to other species that I would call speciesism, where we see other species as being inferior to us, right? And no, people might not talk about that, but that's just baked into a lot of activities of, like, humans are this great species that can think and do all these amazing things, and other species are just dumb and can't do what we can, so they're less than us, they're inferior.
Mm,
And I think that's both unkind and untrue. And
mm,
yeah, reconciling that, if you start to see this quality in animals, in plants, even in the land itself, that because it's alive, it's worthy of the same love and respect, regardless of whether it can do calculus or have a Zoom call or speak English or Portuguese. It makes much more sense to have an attitude of love and reverence and care and
yeah,
respect than one of discrimination and hatred.
yeah, yeah. That makes total sense. That and I'm aligned with you. That transformation needs to happen in order for us to get into a modern golden age. Tashin, we'll wrap this up. I just wanted to once again just being very grateful. I'm very grateful for you being here. It was one of my, like you said a lot of things that I'll need to digest them. The vow is definitely one of them. The You made me think once again about not having a problem with my own beliefs on Magik with a K. And I'm really grateful for our conversation. I have only two questions left. So the first one is there any question that I didn't ask that you would like me to ask you?
Hmm. Can I ask you a question?
Sure.
Uh, there's something that I am constantly encountering that I don't haven't been able to put into words in a way that I really like yet, and I'd be curious to ask you about it, which is something like, so we're having a conversation, right? And
Mhm.
I think there's a really beautiful thing that happens in conversation. And how would you describe what's beautiful and precious about conversation?
Oh, that's a very good question. Um, I think that I'll 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 probably think about it and give you a more complex, more detailed answer or more thought answer. But what appears is, so my background is in music. I was a jazz guitarist and a musician for a while before having a wrist injury. And one of the things that happened, I see conversations the same way as playing jazz. So what I mean by this is that like I bring my knowledge, you bring your knowledge, or let's not call it knowledge, let's call it worldview. So you bring your worldview, I bring my own. And what happens is when you're in a jazz band, each member brings its personality and its knowledge. And when you're playing, suddenly there's like, let's say I'm playing with the other two people, and the music that emerges is something it comes from all of us, but it's a separate identity, which is basically composed by the three not worldviews, but the three individual crafts, let's call it that, right? And so the music, the jazz song, it just emerges from the connection and the symbiosis between these three individuals. I think conversation is the same. My favorite thing about conversation is when it becomes something that it's not my own, it's not yours, it's both of us, right, connecting. It's our own conversation. It's something that it transcends who I am and who you are, and creates this third object, which is only possible because I bring what I have to the table and you do the same, right? So I think I would phrase it like that. It's music. Conversations are music to me, and
Beautiful.
yeah, so that's how I put it. Yeah, but I'll
Mm.
think about it, and if anything else comes up, I'll let you know.
Mm.
Um, Thank you so much, Sachin. The last question is, if people want to connect with you, meet you, donate to your Patreon, please, where do they can find you? Where
Yes, my
can they
website
find you?
is Tasshin.com, Tasshin.com. And I'm also pretty active on Twitter, Tasshin Fogleman, Fogleman. That's my last name. And yeah, those are two good places to find me.
Yeah, well, we'll leave the links in the description to that, to all the articles that you mentioned, and also to some of your YouTube videos. And for the Reach Through podcast, which is something we didn't talk about, but it's an awesome podcast that I totally recommend. Tashin, once again, thank you so much.
Yes, thank you
And
so
I'll
much
see
as well.
you. Yeah, I'll see you guys all in next week's episode. Bye.